Welcome one and all to the first session of Day 2 of Faculty Development Program 2021, organized by the KIIT School of Mass Communication. This is Souptik Garai, your moderator for this session. Today we begin with a session by Dr. Arul Aram, Professor and Head, Department of Media Sciences at Anna University, Chennai, Tamil Nadu. Dr. Aram will be talking on the topic Trends in Environmental Communication. So I'll invite Dr. Anurag Sahu, the Assistant Professor at School of Mass Communication at KIIT, to welcome Dr. Arul Aram. Over to you, Dr. Sahu.
Oh, thank you. Good evening. And
thank you, sir. Thank you, Souptik. I will give a brief introduction.
Okay, thank you.
Then we will.
Welcome.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Souptik. Dr. Aram is a professor and head department of media sciences at Anna University, Chennai, and he was the director of UGC's Educational Multimedia Research Center during the period of 2010 and 11. He was the additional director of the Center for Faculty Development during the period of 2019 and 20, and he had worked as the chief sub-editor at the Hindu newspaper, and he had also served as the president of the Madras Press Club. So for his publication, he had published 143 research papers and articles and had authored 5 books. And he was the postdoc fellow of London School of Economics, and he specialized in areas of environmental communication and communicating climate change. Today in this session, Professor Arul will deliver his talk on trends in environmental communication. Thank you so much, sir, for giving consent. We can start.
Thank you so much. And it's a great delight to be part of you. And I had visited your university. And when the Science Congress was held, Indian Science Congress, and later when your university had given honorary doctorate to our Indian agricultural scientist, M.S. Samanathan, the function was held in Chennai. I had also been an invitee for that. It was so glad to be for that, and I'm glad that your institution is maintaining quality education. And today I will talk about trends in environmental communication. This is a new field, and so I wanted to. My perception is that a person who is intervening in the field should learn something about environmental aspect as well. And this is what Cox has to say about the environmental communication. Environmental communication is a pragmatic and constitutive vehicle of our understanding of environment as well as our relationships with natural world. It is a symbolic medium that we use in constructing environmental problems and negotiating society's different responses to them. Even it also involves how we respond to that. And for instance, a posh family drives in a posh car in a city road, and the children drop some of the biscuit covers or some cookies covers on the road, in the middle of the road. That itself is an environmental concern, and how people respond to the issues also. And as such that I have started with the argument that environmental communication is an interdisciplinary field. But when I browse through literature for preparing for the lecture, people say it's a trans-disciplinary field. Trans-disciplinary is higher order than interdisciplinary. For instance, Mitchell Foucault, the discourse analysis, is a transdisciplinary person, not only cutting across the field, intervening in the different fields. Transdisciplinary field cutting across environmental studies, risk communication, sociology, psychology, and political science. And this is what that Luhmann has to say about it. Fish or men could die swimming in the seas or in the rivers, could cause disease. There may be no more oil at the petrol stations, and the average temperature could rise or fall. As long as this is not communicated, and there is no social effects. Something is happening only if we communicate that to people, it has social effects. For a long time, a classic example in the Minatama Bay in the Japan, they did not understand why people were affected by neurological diseases. Later, they found that it was because of the neurotoxin and the industrial methyl mercury poisoning in the bay, that industrial effluent discharge. Environmental communication is important because the need to reduce our impact on the environment is greater than ever before, and we need to spread the message. The cost of not taking care of the environment is much more than cleaning up the environment once the damage is done. What is the purpose? The environmental communication educates, alerts, persuades, motivates, and helps to solve environmental problems. We continue our wasteful waste. By 2050, almost 4 billion. The 2050, the population calculation is that 9.5 billion. 4 billion will live in area experiencing severe water shortage. When I grew up as a boy in Madurai, and the water level was just 20 feet below in open well. Today they had to dig 1,000 feet bore wells, no more open wells. Environment protection has to do with health. Atomic bombs that as a reaction to the Pearl Harbor bombing by Japan, atomic bombs that devastated Hiroshima and Nagasaki in 1945 have affected human health for ages. Who are the stakeholders in environmental communication? Citizens and community groups, environmental groups, scientists, corporations and business lobby, media and environmental journalism, public officials and regulators. All these people are involved in environmental communication. And the classic example, how the trend was set in the US first by the environmental communication is that after the Green Revolution when there was starvation in the developing world, Green Revolution produced enough food and people were no more dying of hunger. But at the same time, it has several environmental impacts. Rachel Carson, one of the scientists in US, was first to talk about articulate, and she was very powerfully articulating. Her language was very good, and her book Silent Spring is translated in many languages around the world. Even now, it's well read. And she talked about, she was disturbed about the indiscriminate use of pesticides. Pesticides are meant to kill a particular pest, but more often than not, it kills cricket, birds, frogs, and all other insects and animals which are useful for the plants and which don't disturb the plants also. She lobbied hard to ban toxic chemicals, including DDT. She testified before the Congress, that's a US equivalent of the parliament, in 1963, and called for new policies with respect to human health and environment. And it was a trendsetter book, and her contribution was great. And in our India, that environmental activism was an armchair activism till 1973, when Chipko movement, one of the person who supported the movement, Sundarlal Bhavana, just died recently. And it's a women who organized themselves, because when the forest people did not allow the local villagers to cut the trees for even the small level for the agricultural implements, agriculture tools, but they allow the contractor to cut the trees for sports goods manufacturing. Then the women hugged the trees and prevented the forest from allowing the cutting of the trees, felling of the trees. This was a time that environment movement, which was an armchair movement, turned into field activism. And risk of nuclear energy. Chernobyl was an eye-opener in 1986, the first ecological disaster on the global scale, and first important case of environmental communication. And more recently, in 2011, in spite of a big seawall, Fukushima nuclear power plant in Japan hit by a tsunami and resulted in melting down of 3 of the 6 nuclear reactors. No more nuclear energy. Nuclear energy, for instance, in 2009, Copenhagen, one of the famous climate summit I had been, and there it was projected as a clean energy. And after that, now internationally, it's agreed that it's no more that you can promote as a climate-friendly thing. And because if a disaster happens, that it will be tremendous. And Kudankulam we have activated in Tamil Nadu, but after the Fukushima disaster, the protest against the Kudankulam nuclear plant revived. And in fact, in India, that environmental activism, one of the trend-setting thing was that Bhopal gas tragedy, and it was in the midnight of December 2023, it happened, and methyl isocyanide leaked, and the death toll is put even up to 15,000, but officially it's 2,259. And it was simple precautionary measures like you cover your face or your nose with the wet cloth, that methyl isocyanate won't affect you. It was not been propagated with the people. And this particular disaster, Bhopal gas tragedy, has international coverage it has got, and many young journalists with idealism, it has turned many people to get into journalism with idealism. Even one of our own, Kailasam, son of a famous film director and a popular film director, he took to social documentaries out of this thing. And in one of the protests, he went along with the Padayatra from Bhopal to Delhi along with the protesting group. After this, as a fallout of this, the Environmental Protection Act was enacted in 1986. And what is as environmental communication, as if you think about it, it involves a variety of interactions ranging from interpersonal communication to media coverage related to environment. It includes all forms of communication ranging from organizational to group and interpersonal to mediated. It requires in-depth knowledge related to the local context, the concerns and values of the audience and the environment. It is a lay activity as well as a professional practice. Even the lay people can contribute to it, and as a professional practice, the environmental journalists too can contribute to it. And when we talk about environmental communication, even as part of the media discourses analysis by researchers, we take to frame analysis. It's the Erving Goffman in 1974 in his book Frame Analysis first talked about it. He defines frame as cognitive maps and patterns of interpretation that people use to organize their understanding of reality. The example of a public health frame illustrates the role of framing in the construction of a problem and recommendation. When you use environment as a public health frame and we recommend a solution to the environment problem, this is a set of frames we have used in my research, and we have used the sources are given below, 3 sets of frames combined for our Indian understanding without any overlap. Responsibility frame, and that is a responsibility of blame for the cause or the solution is placed on individuals or group. Economic frame, scientific frame, extreme weather events frame, political frame, biodiversity frame. Some of these people did not use biodiversity, but we have used it as part of our research activity. That virtual discourses, because now the environment is mostly visual. As simple as that polar bear sitting fragilely on a small piece of ice, not because when ice melts in the northern pole. So that when you take to the research media discourse on environment, we should be thorough about the visual rhetorics by influencing our perception or the way we see certain aspects of the environment by constructing what the public believes is an environmental problem. In the way public believes, the visual rhetorics are framed. The lack of visual evidence of climate change has become a problem for scientists in educating the public. One of the things that when you get more visual evidence, then climate change, it's a tricky subject, even within the environmental aspect, it's very easy to communicate. Visual images can be sites of contestation. Even the visuals can be interpreted differently. Opponents may challenge or seek to suppress a powerful image, and they may use a very different image to visualize the same set of conditions. And as part of the media research, we can use visual ethnography, taking from the drawing it from the anthropological field or from our own thing, our linguistic field, that visual semiotics we can use, other methods of visual aspects we can use. Even discourse analysis, seeing any visuals as an object, we can use discourse analysis as well. Lawrence Buell, he comes from the English literature. So that's why I say that environment is a transdisciplinary field, and he classified as part of the analysis, eco-criticism analysis, which can be used in the film studies by the media people as well. One of my research scholars is using the same thing as post-apocalyptic films she studies, and this 4 thing. The non-human environment is present not merely as a framing device, but as a presence that begins to suggest that human history is implicated in natural history. The human interest is not understood to be the only legitimate interest. Human accountability to the environment is part of the text's ethical orientation. Some human accountability is related to ethical orientation as a theorist sees. Some sense of environment as a process rather than as a constant or given is at least implicit interest. because the process is how it happens is more important than just event. And Al Gore got the Nobel Peace Prize in 2007 for campaigning against climate change. Even I had been trained under him. And one of his successful documentaries is an Inconvenience. He's written several books as well. An Inconvenient Truth, which was viewed throughout the world by many media scholars and the students in the West as well. Public participation in decision making. And those who are affected by decisions have a right to be involved in the decision making. So any new projects come which has an environmental impact and people's consultations are made, the right to know reflects the principle of transparency. The right to comment reflects the principle of direct participation and democratic decisions. For instance, the hydrocarbon projects or sterilite projects, these sort of the people's consultations were not made adequate enough. That's why the problems have come. And even in mining projects in different parts of the country as well, this is the case. New media and environmental journalism, that traditional news media play a major role. Newspapers, news magazines, network of television news and radio news programs, online news sites, blogs and environmental news service. Blogs also play a major role in environmental communication. And when you talk about the journalistic norms, the traditional journalistic norms come into question or disputed when it comes to the environmental communication. An important practice that affects the environmental news reporting is the value or the newsworthiness of the story. That itself directly whether it is newsworthy now, right now, then it's a question. The values of objectivity and balance have been bedrock norms of journalism for almost a century. Particularly in environment journalism, reporters struggle to maintain genuine objectivity. Objectivity in the sense that as BBC would define it is that to report all sides of the story. Or to put it simply, it's the two sides of the story, two sides of the coin or something like that. Balance usually is underscored for instance, you balance one political party, you balance BJP with the Congress party. And one day journalist writes pro-BJP, another day pro-Congress. So you balance as a pro-BJP news versus Congress news. But it cannot be case with certain tricky subjects or science-based subjects like climate change. You cannot balance climate change climate science with climate skeptic thing fueled by funded by the fossil fuel lobby. And you cannot balance, that means you are balancing science with non-science, which almost resulting with balancing climate change with nonsense. And that is not the case, but sometimes journalists attempt to do that as well. Influence of environmental journalists, political economy approach, which long talked about, even my teachers like BP Sanjay are well known for it, referred, or Vinod Parwala also I think is a political economy approach person. And political economy refers to the influence of owners and the economic interests of the owners of newspapers and television networks on the news content of these media sources. This Marxist approach can also be taken into account when you analyze environmental communication. Then the gatekeeping role, how the gatekeeper as an editor or the chief reporter discards certain news or accepts certain news. And many editors and news, in fact, environment news is tricky because many editors find it difficult to carry the environment news for the two reasons. One thing is that the invisible nature of many environment programs makes it hard for reporters to fit this tool into a conventional news format, because it's not now the present, it's the impending danger in the future, people may not be interested. Next thing is that journalists are not properly trained to cover environmental stories. That again becomes a problem. Social media and online coverage. Environmental journalists have migrated online because online has taken a vast presence when it covers to environmental stories. Many people are even journalists who may not be able to talk much things in the mainstream media, they put the stories online. The online environmental news stories offer the widest access to both working journalists and readers looking for more in-depth and environmental news and timely information. Journalists blog and green blogosphere. Even journalists who normally write stories fitting into the news values and other things during the free time, they blog and put certain things that facts about the environmental issue. The fast-growing source of online news and analysis of environmental topic actually has not been the environmental news services, but the blogosphere, because blogosphere has taken over and it's very successful as far as when it comes to environmental communication. The blog is an online site that is authored by an individual or collective authors, and that posts information or commentary about specific topics. Blog also features video and graphics. Of late, blogs are not just text. It can feature video and graphics as well. And social media and environment. Social media have altered the landscape of environmental communication. Social media can be defined as a use of web-based technologies and mobile applications for personal interaction. Social news sources and RSS feeds are ways that individuals increasingly can easily access environmental information or stories in a timely manner. That then and there they can get the news and different interpretation of the environment, which even the mainstream media may not know or maybe shying away from covering. Facebook serves as a bridge for local communities and citizens, and it provides participatory communication, reporting and documenting. Citizens, researchers, and environmental groups are using mobile apps, digital cameras, smartphones, iPads, and online registries to document their observations of natural world or report environment problems to others. With Facebook, Twitter, and other social media, the reach of public scrutiny and criticism has accelerated dramatically. It also means that we always talked about the agenda setting by the media, but when citizens are so active on the media, for instance, Greenpeace, our government was against it and it had to fold up its office, but even online presence, they are very strong. And many other activists, even individuals, when they are active in the social media, the media, mainstream media has to take the news or take the perspective from the people and publish in the mainstream media. So the mainstream media can no more confine itself to what it wants to say. It has to listen to what people have to say. So the reverse agenda setting is very much in the at present happening. 6 essentials of environmental communication: knowledge of ecological laws, sensitive to cultural dimension. The cultural dimension is very important. Ability to network effectively, efficiency to use media agenda setting, appreciation and practice of environmental ethics, conflict resolution, mediation, and arbitration. All these are essential aspects of environmental communication. And Chennai floods, the Chennai floods as such, and was 2015, it was a major disaster. And initially, the then environment minister said that Chennai floods was caused by because of the encroachments in Chennai and because the water cannot flow. But there was later, within 2 days, when journalists asked, when activists were very strongly objecting to the minister's comments, before he went to the Paris climate summit, he said Chennai first was because of the 150 years of historical emissions by the West we are suffering. And in social media, several other reasons were attributed, which even the mainstream media did not cover well. The Pallikarne marshland being encroached upon, river routes being converted into plain runways. For instance, in a traditional river where river was flowing, the airport is built. The river becomes a runway and the planes are drifted away and when the flood comes. Outer ring road and places like Mudichur. The water.
I request all of you to kindly mute yourselves. Kindly mute yourselves, please.
Outer ring road, the new settlement area, water went beyond the first floor. That means that probably 20 to 25 feet above the ground. And that was the case. There, what happened, that outer ring road, they built without enough space for water to flow under. And so the entire road, the elevator road became a dam wall-like thing. The other side of where the river was coming, and there was no outflow, and it became served as a dam. The entire housing colony was underwater. And organizers can mute others from your side. That will be better. And I want to yet another aspect, which is a commercial aspect, which even media does not want to touch. In the name of affordable housing joint venture in Chennai and many places, they buy almost all flat builders. The joint venture is a flat builders. They violate the rule and they don't even leave 5 feet around the building. And so that has again open spaces there. And our former Chief Minister Jayalada's regime, we talked about the water harvesting policy, and it was much publicized by the media. But in the last 1 decade, the water harvesting is no more there. Even the existing water harvesting structures, they are hogged, their percolation pits are clogged. But luckily, the new government has taken over. Yesterday, in the governor's address to the assembly, it was the governor has said that Chennai Metro Flood Management Committee to be set up. It is probably 16 years after the major Chennai floods. Hope that no more such major Chennai floods. So at the time, I was in the Paris Climate Summit. My house was under 3 feet below water. The main rooms were 3 feet underwater. What is climate change? For example, climate change becomes a tougher discourse in this area. What is climate change as such is a new variable in the environmental communication. Even in the textbooks on environmental education, which is taught in the schools and colleges, climate change does not find much part of it, because at that time climate discourse was not much there. Climate change is basically, when you talk about climate change, it's a global phenomena. It's talked about as a global phenomenon: temperature rise, glacier meltdown, sea level rise. These three we can definitely say they are climate change phenomena. But the regional phenomena, which will anyway happen, like cyclone, drought, flood, and erratic rainfall, and which cannot directly be related to climate change, but they can be accelerated. The frequency can increase. Once in a 500-year event can become once in 100 years, once in 50 years. That again, for instance, Chennai flood of 2015 was once in 100 years. The same thing is said about Kedarnath disaster in 2030. Journalists normally what happens in the disaster coverage is that journalists do an overkill during disaster. They cover a lot of stories, but continuous coverage is necessary to make people aware of the impending or the future disaster to happen. The Chennai floods, I already explained this, that the climate change news is climate change newsworthy. That is a thing I already talked about. The nature of climate change is so difficult to communicate than other environmental issues. So much so that many politicians and sometimes ordinary people talk about the ozone layer depletion, ozone hole as part of climate change. Ozone hole depletion as part of the CFCs that earlier we used in the man-made greenhouse gas, you use in refrigerator and air conditioner, no more you use after the Montreal Protocol. But that they talk about climate change because it's projected as if it's an ozone hole. Even scientists will say that ozone hole is erroneous. Thinning of the ozone layer is a proper thing. And that people want a visible thing like a ozone hole, a hole in the atmospheric layer and thing. But the Algo's argument is that based on the Montreal Protocol, we are able to prevent that increase in the ozone layer depletion. The same thing, we will be able to contain the climate change. That is his argument. And issues of climate change, too much of information. One thing researchers have found that if you dump in too much of technical information, also complex information, also it has an opposite effect. Because if people get to know that the complexity of the issue, it leads to skepticism. People tend to ignore global warming when they realize that there is no easy solution. Talk about the real world, not abstract. You talk about the real world. How people in this Puri district in Orissa, they are often affected by cyclone, which the cyclones were not so intense or so fierce, or so many cyclones do not happen in early years. Connect with what people experience: cyclone, drought, glacier burst, example 2013 Kedarnath flooding, and use jargon-free language. The entire climate literature, the scientists given jargon-free language, which even journalists don't understand. When they pass on the same jargon, people are not interested in reading it. Now, I as an academic and some of us from the media studies have taken to climate change. How climate change is related to media academic, I will say that. One aspect is that we can evaluate media coverage, and right away we can take a newspaper or television and say that how much of climate change, what sort of climate change, what aspects of climate change are covered in the media. That's how the scientific thing is covered, political thing is covered, biodiversity. That's how I showed the frame analysis in newspapers, television, radio, or social media. And we can introduce a course or a paper on communicating climate change. There have been centers on communicating climate change set up in US, Germany, and other countries. Train journal. Apart from that aspect, we can train journalists and we can organize workshops of climate change thing. One of my friends, Navaratnam in Madurai, he organizes workshop on climate change for journalists. Create awareness among the people at the grassroots. We can, because grassroots people are suffering, they are the worst hit by the climate change. We can go to them and create awareness among them. Document the happenings at the grassroots. Because another aspect is that even scientists do not know what is happening. How many climate scientists have visited remote parts of Puri districts where islands after islands are, the villages after villages are swallowed by sea erosion, or in Sundarbans where islands after islands are swallowed by sea erosion. And the scientists have to visit the areas. If the scientists are not able to visit the areas, even as social scientists, even as communicators, we can talk to the local people. We can document that people's perception on climate change, people's perception on disasters, and how it is. For instance, an old man in Ladakh, 92-year-old man, we talk to him how the glaciers which never used to melt, when he was saying nowadays is melting. And even as in the late 50s, I am able to say that we used to have well water at 20 feet. Now it's 1,000 feet or more borewell. And that perception of the people have to be documented. Whether it has a climate change thing, we'll have to first study out. This lived experience and perspectives have to be documented. They may not directly relate to climate change. We cannot directly say, but it has to be put to scientific validation. But unless people document it and unless people record what is happening, and there may not be a process by which we will be able to put that into scientific validation. So we need to document that first, and that as part of our discourse, even we can include the climate change awareness at the grassroots, and as well as we can call a focus group discussion among the villages and document that even as part of our media research and discourses. And as part of the climate change, we have several job opportunities, and the mass media include, for instance, if you see that Snowpiercer or any of the movies on climate change, and they carefully study the climate change literature, and it's not haphazard coverage of climate change. They carefully understand the climate change thing, the day after tomorrow, or any such movies that then they had incorporated this aspect, and then only they prepare the movies. And so much of thing is gone into behind that the scientific knowledge is studied, and then the climate change is being a thing. And if we, from the media department, we are able to churn out communicators with climate, what is that, environmental knowledge, and we can be involved in green marketing and green consumption. And for instance, that nowadays that the entire world is moving towards the green thing, and as small things that even before this plastics were banned in Chennai, and it is now banned, but it's everywhere. But that's a different irony of it. And but even before plastics were banned, some of us stopped using plastics, and we used to carry a bag with it. Or if you go to a shop to get a packed biscuit packet, we will say that I don't want that additional package plastic cover, and I will carry it in hand. So, but now, so the people's awareness in climate change, that people individually can resist that, that will have an overall impression. So much, sir. For instance, in Washington Reserve Forest, where I had went for trekking and mountain climbing, rock climbing, along with my friends near Washington DC in Virginia district. And there, when people go for trekking, they bring back all the plastics and they take a cover with them. They put the plastics back into the cover, and this is a small thing. All that they go for is the trekking or the rock climbing. But along with that, they take away somebody has used the plastics and put it, or waste they have discarded. They pick it up and come. That awareness have to be inbuilt into it, people, and then that will have go a long way in safeguarding the people against that environment. So environment communication has to be total, not necessarily. It has to be mainstreamed into every discipline. For instance, when you talk about climate change, they say mainstreamed into physics, chemistry, biology, engineering, all aspects, civil engineering, probably mechanical engineering as well. And like that, this environmental activism has to be mainstream. And as people from our discipline, we have a major role to play. That environmental art, even drawings, other things. For instance, I don't remember exactly that Rachel Carson book, when it was The Silent Spring, was translated into Tamil. They had their own local drawing with the local artist, the cover page drawing. So the graphics drawing as environment or cartoons on climate change, this can also play a major role in checking the climate change. Crisis communication. When there is a crisis, we should be able to communicate. The Chennai floods of 2015, or probably that, for instance, Odisha 1999, when the super cyclone came, that when I visited some of the villages, people said that for 15 days that government did not come. For 5 days, they did not even, they stayed put in the place they were. After that, they organized, what is that, pool kitchen, and they pooled all their resources and organized the kitchen, and they started coming back to. And after 15 days, the government, some of the remote villages, the government's help came. But today, if such a disaster is to happen, we'll be more prepared. In fact, Chennai, that 2015 flood came all of a sudden, and people who were not less articulate with the neighbors and with the IT, information technology, they were well off. They were not even mingling with the neighbors. They were hardworking. They come to the house and enjoy, and but they were not bothered about the rest of the world. But there, they came back in the sleeveless banian and half trousers outside with the plastic money. There's a credit card, debit card. No ATM was working. So everybody was literally a beggar on the street. Then the people started working together, and everybody became an activist. And then the change happened. And the lot of relief and rehabilitation efforts, rescue, relief, and rehabilitation efforts during Chennai floods were done by the people themselves. People stood up, and they were able to meet face the consequence, and they were able to help each other. Law and politics, that climate change has a lot to do with the law, and starting with that, for instance, that I talked about the Environmental Protection Act 1986 or the Biodiversity Act 2002. All these things, a little bit of thing we have to study, and that even the Biodiversity Act, they even talk about if you are taking some knowledge from the traditional people, tribals, and you are making a commercial produce, a good part of that particular the commercial produce have to be, and the income generated by the commercial produce have to be given back to the people. And still now the companies which have produced products, they have deposited the money with the ministry, but still they do not know how to circulate or how to hand it over to the tribal communities. for which the journalists have to understand the intricacies of the Biodiversity Act and understand the intricacies of the tribal community, and then they'll have to explain in simple terms to explain or devise ways how this can be done, so that the tribal communities who are the source of the produce, new produce, they can also economically develop, and there will be a sustainable development in the community also. Advocacy is a major aspect. Advocacy in the sense that you take a campaigning angle. And I would say that the lofty principles of objectivity is always in the question, not necessarily now. And for instance, I will say that when our Indian freedom fighters, they supported the Indian freedom struggle protesting against the British rule, they were following advocacy. They were not taking the objective angle of balancing Indian freedom struggle on the other side with the British oppression. And when we talked about the development communication in the 70s, 80s, we were talking of taking sides. And when we talk about the peace journalism, we were talking about taking sides of the peace as well versus the sides of the conflict. Like that, when you talk about the environmental communication, we should take the sides of the environment friendly thing and write about it. And many scholars argue that the environmental journalist himself is tasked to take an advocacy angle, not just a neutral, impassionate angle. Sometimes impassionate angle cannot be taken. I was working with the Hindu, and after the 2004 tsunami, one of my colleagues who was talking along with me in a panel discussion, who has covered extensively climate, this tsunami, 2004 tsunami. The first line she started with is that Vani Dorasamy, she started by saying that immediately after the call came, within half an hour, our office is close to the Mount Road. The Mount Road office is close to the beach, and within 2 kilometers or so, within half an hour, I was in the spot. Children were without their parents, and they were running about. Cars were tilted, and there were dead bodies. I did not know what to do. I simply sat down and cried. And next, within 2 days, I went to Kolachal in the southern tip of the country, and where a priest took me to a place near a Catholic church, and I was standing in a place. The priest explained to me, under your feet, 550 bodies are buried. All died of tsunami. How can I be impassionate? The simple aspect of objectivity is being impassionate. That's why the international journalism discourse also, the objectivity versus reflexivity has happened. But definitely when you talk about environmental communication, the dispassionate thing cannot work. You will have to be passionate towards the environment. And if we train as communicators in our people can work for non-governmental organization as well. Probably you know that as part of the development activities internationally, now as part of the projects, they give a particular 10% or particular portion of the funding for process documentation. It may be a written documentation or a video documentation. And that our communication students can fill that plot. So we'll have to look for the new sort of places that we can do it. And the mediation has to happen with the people and the government. And for that also, even right now, one of our students, former student, is very active as in the vaccination campaign. And as part of the corporation of, she's working as an officer in the corporation of Chennai. And the mediating with the people and negotiating with the people when during the implementation of the project, or understanding whether the project is really needed, our communication people can play a major role. Let us halt the degradation of environment, and for that, environment communication plays a major role. Thank you so much. I would like to take a few questions.
Thank you so much, sir. Am I audible?
Yeah.
Yes. Thank you so much, sir, for your enlightening talk on the environmental communication. Well, we have a couple of questions here. Yeah. So, Ms. Madhumanti Mitra asks, with the advent of this online media, we are constantly fighting the merciless dissemination of fake news.
With the advent of online media?
She wants to know about the fake news. That do you think environmental communication might also have to combat the spread of fake news? If so, what should be the role the faculties of colleges or universities in this combat?
Yeah, fake news, and I think one of the conferences, last time I came to Bhubaneswar, my presentation was on fake news, and it was an India media conclave. And okay, the fake news as such, not always all news that is branded as fake is fake news. For instance, Michel Foucault would say that dominant minority determines what is right and what is wrong. And when that is the case, and when somebody who questions the dominant minority and gives a different version, and that becomes a fake news. You see that Galileo, and he reiterated the Copernican theory, the heliocentric theory, and he just said that Earth revolves around the sun, not the sun around the Earth. At the time, the biblical scholars did not believe it, or they thought that he is doing a heresy. They piled up the wooden logs and tied him above the logs, and they were about to burn him as a witch. And finally, he has to beg for forgiveness, and he was released, and his body was buried somewhere in a remote place. Only much later, they reinterpreted the Bible and then they reburied the Bible in the famous, reburied the remains of the Galileo's body in the famous Florence Cathedral. What I'm saying is that I will say a simple thing, that one example during the Chennai floods, and the Chennai floods, some news went around that crocodiles have escaped from the crocodile park. Let's say the crocodile park has a 6 feet compound or a 4 feet compound. If the floods waters rise above 8 feet, would they escape or would they not escape? I'm asking you. The water rises above 8 feet. Definitely they will escape. But would the government like to admit it that they escape? And another example is that there is a DLF building. That's DLF is they rent the office space for different computer and other companies. And here, there was an underground car parking, and many people, the flood waters were released. Many drivers were along with the cars. They were parked. They were staying in the basement, and many of the self-driving people also, when they hear the flood waters was released, they wanted to immediately go down and take their cars out. But all of them had a watery grave. Till the end of everything was settled down. Even now, we do not know how many people died in that basement of the building. The government would not like to reveal that. Today, that if some, for instance, I will say that you are from Odisha, that the 1990 super cyclone, it said the official figure is that 10,000 people died, but unofficially the non-government organization put it as that 30,000 people died, and 370,000 cattle died. So that returning to livelihood option was very difficult. And the same, almost the same figure in 2004, the tsunami in Andaman and Nicobar Islands, and the official figure is around 10,000, and the real figure is 30,000. Many of the Tamilians who went and did not have a permit, they would not have been accounted for. In Odisha, many of the Bangladeshi migrants who did not have citizenship or valid permit, they would not have been, and simply their bodies would have burned by the NGOs as a goodwill. So sometimes when we put alternative news as part of the discourse, then it becomes, it is branded as fake news. But on the other hand, even environmental activists suddenly they may get the things wrong also, then they put it out of enthusiasm. That should not happen. For instance, I would say that our honorable then Javadekar, environment minister, immediately after the Chennai floods, he said Chennai floods is only because of the clogging of waterways. And can we say it's a fake news? It appeared, it's a formal press meet in through press through media, and within 2 days, when activists opposed Chennai floods, it's because of the historical emission for 150 years by the West, and the poor countries like India who have been who have not been emitting much carbon emission. Our carbon footprint is very less, but we are at the receiving end. It makes a somersault. So sometimes the fake news is very tricky, but people have to be very careful in knowing what is fake news. Or you'll have to make a discretion. If you doubt it, don't pass it on to others. Thank you. Next question, please.
Yes. So in order to make this conversation much more interactive, I urge, like if you have any follow-up questions or any questions for that matter, you can please raise your hand or unmute yourself. So next question we have from Dr. Pragmatic Patnaik, who asks specific to about reporting about illegal mining affecting environment, specifically when there is a nexus between media organizations, media mining mafia and the state. Right. So what role can a journalist play in such a situation is what Dr. Pragmatic Patnaik asks.
Illegal mining.
Illegal mining, yeah.
Illegal mining. And first thing, whether in legal mining, whether they are mining the exact amount of minerals or whatever it is, they are promised with the government, they are agreed upon with the government, that itself is doubt. But otherwise that poor people sometimes in Meghalaya, sometimes they mine in a small quantum, that may not be, that is for sustenance consumption for their basic living, and that may not cause greater disturbance about that. And there are other issues about the legal mining. How many places in India after mining, or the open cast mining, they put the what is a dug sand or whatever it is, dug soil outside. How many people close that place and again develop it in an eco-sensitive zone by planting afforestation? And that is a question. Why the government is not able to enforce it? First, we should talk about the legal mining, which is permitted or given, and then why the regulations are not followed. The post mining everywhere, most of the places, very large, almost like a molehill or a mountain. The soil is put outside and it's not closed. And whether the precautions necessary for ecologically sensitive places are taken into account is a question. And mining is done in the mining produces a good foreign exchange or good economic resource for our country. But why is it that in the places where the mining happens, the poorest of the poor people in the India live, Chhattisgarh or some places in Orissa? That has to be addressed by the government policy. And apart from illegal mining, this has it has to be linked with the local people's livelihood. That has to be properly taken care of. If the government has put the norms that local people should be employed, whether they are really employed, whether the income is percolating to the local communities, that has to be taken care of. Whether as part of the corporate social responsibility, even this big companies like Vedanta, they are helping people in developing the poor areas where they are generating their bulk of their income. That should be taken care of.
Sir, when we talk about the media content, particularly in the mainstream media, and most of the newspapers, including newspapers and television channels, they give least importance to the environmental communication related, I mean, environment related stories or environment related content. So in that case, the reporter who is dealing with that particular beat, how he can pitch the story, how he can portray it, so that it can at least drag the attention of viewers or the readers.
Yeah.
What alternate platform we can use for that?
Yeah. Well, one aspect is that what we teach in our journalism classroom is that when in doubt, clarify or check it out. But actually, what journalists practice is that when in doubt, cut it out. If the journalist is not sure about what is, journalists are arrogant people. I have been a journalist. Of course, our teachers are arrogant, our students will say, but journalists are much more arrogant. And even if there is a traffic violation, if police pulls them, they'll be arrogant with the police. Our teachers at least will be more polite, and the arrogance also means they do not want to intervene in an area which they don't know and make an ass of themselves. And there can be an academic who intervenes in the climate change, and when a question is asked in a seminar, will say that I'm a media expert, not a climate expert, and wriggle out, but still have the courage to intervene. But journalists normally, whatever it is, they are directly getting feedback from the people. They don't like writing nonsense if they are not sure about it. Because of this thing, and one thing is that another aspect I will say, even as an environmental person specializing in environment, if I cannot assure a person who is working in environment, automatically he becomes gets a good job and placed well, but it takes some time. But a person as an academics like us, if you start personally specializing in environment, and if you do a good job, we are well received, because there is a lot of scope for it. And likewise, in the journalism field, somebody specializes in environment, and for instance, a person writes a story and he brings a vast kaleidoscopic view of the particular subject. He writes a remote village. He even talks about ecotourism, and he talks about climate change. The different variables he brings into a story, that makes it interesting. For instance, I will say that Titanic is a film we all enjoyed, but there had been 4 other Titanic movies which have failed. But why it was there? And there was a class dialectics. Then the typical love formula: poor guy falls with the upper guy, rich girl, and finally succeed. And then it is a postmodernism thing. Then a lot of graphics, animation, visual effects. A combination of that, and then is a crystal clear, internationally accepted English. Combination of that makes this effective. Just like the journalist, if it's an efficient journalist, for a climate journalist, if you are able to write it a good story, any newspaper will accept it. And one thing I like to tell about television, compared to newspaper, which follows a consistent editorial line, because editorial line in the sense if they are taking a pro-climate approach, all the stories will be pro-climate approach. But television, it's a short visuals that what is every small story, a small within a few seconds is a standalone. So they don't have a consistent editorial approach. Each time, for instance, they can put a climate-friendly story. Next time, they can put a climate story which is not climate-friendly. That inconsistent approach is followed by television. That has to be changed, and there is a need for particularly tackling that television channels about the issue.
Except the event stories, we are not focusing on the process stories.
Yeah,
basically, so far as environmental communication is concerned, being a student of environmental science as well as communication, I feel this is my observation in a long stint in media. Every time, suppose there is cyclone, there is any disaster is happening, we are covering only the event, but we have never covered the process, or we have never covered the how it can be avoided, how it can be tackled. That on that part we have never focused.
One example I would like to say about my illustrious senior. He is unlike me, is a very famous person, P. Sainath of the Hindu, and he rural reporting he covered a simple thing like let's say that farmer suicide. We only cover as an event, number of deaths, but he went deep into it. And Vadarbha region, one of the richest of the farmers in India live. And there, it's not a starvation death, as we all see. He found that people have invested in the daughter's marriage, they have taken a loan, or invested in agriculture. Suddenly there is a drought, or suddenly there is a heavy rainfall. Erratic rainfall is a heavy downpour is also an attribute of climate change. And because of the crops have rotten, and suddenly there is a poor harvest. And because of that self-respect, they commit suicide, not because they are extremely poor and they are without food. And this only if you go into the intricacies. Or earlier we used to hear a lot of stories of Maoist or Ranveer Sena that fighting and killing. Only so much killed, killed. But what is the process? What is the resource sharing? What is the cause of that? What is the caste conflict involved? And some of us don't want to listen to these tricky things as well. We are bothered about the city-based brains are not interested in so much of the process analysis also. And more of the process analysis stories should come, and slowly it is getting covered. And more of journalists have to be more serious in covering the process rather than just the events, rather than just as an event. Thank you, sir. Thank you.
We have another question. This is from Dr. ACP Tripathi. Well, I'll just break the question into two parts. The first question is, do you think that air conditioning is the world's next big threat? If yes, the second question would be, what can be the strategic environmental communication and requisite behavioral change communication framework to mitigate this very threat?
Air conditioning.
Air conditioning as the world's next big threat. You see it as well.
So luckily that no more our air conditioners use chlorofluorocarbons, which is a ozone depleting gas, and good for it. And one thing is that I was talking about the joint venture, that the flat development in cities. They build the flats without leaving any space, so that within one flat and one flat complex and another flat complex, there is sometimes hardly not even a foot distance. I'm not joking. And so there is no ventilation. Everybody is using air conditioner, and it's a middle class, not even upper middle class, even the typical middle class is using air conditioner. And a good portion of the income goes for air conditioning. And luckily, I live in an old house, and I did not go for a giant venture. Even after the Chennai 2015 flooding, we raised the house using a Haryana technology by 4 feet, and so that we have space around. So I don't use air conditioners in my house. And so because we have a little bit of plants, trees, we have ventilation. And one thing is that, so much so that even in the peak of winter, they use air conditioning. And because they want to ward off mosquitoes, they don't want to open the windows at all. And the simple technology I follow is that before it gets dark, I close the windows, and that's how the mosquitoes don't come in. And good number of city people suffer from lot of respiratory illness only because of air conditioners. If you are having air conditioner in your thing, you are not supposed to have loft in that room. You have to clean up every dust in the room. Otherwise, the dust circulates within the room, and you will definitely suffer from. Now I am sitting in a head's room. It's a fairly big room, so I use air conditioning. But when I use my personal room as a smaller room, though there is an air conditioner, even in the office, I normally don't use it, because I keep the window. Here, if I keep the windows too big windows, so I'll have to close it in the evening, or some other rats or even squirrels or even monkeys can come in Anna University campus, which will be a nuisance. That's why I use air conditioner. Otherwise, I don't use it. Air conditioners is better avoided, and in Indian conditioner, and because of that, there are several other problems also, that our grid is not prepared for so many air conditioners over a short. Even within Anna University is not prepared. There's a big technology university, and in the general grid in the public, because of that, there are the grid failure also happens once in a while. Better we go against air conditioners as much as possible. Second part of question you said.
Thank you, sir. It's already 5:03, and we have 3 or 4 more questions. So
maybe short answers, or you can cut short.
Sorry, sir. Would you mind if you
short answers? I will. Short answer, very short answers. I will.
So we can continue up to 5, 12, 10, 12. Yeah, next 5-6 minutes we can continue. Sure. No problem.
Okay, so next question is from Ms. Ruby Nanda. She asks that how relevant is environment communication as a course for media students at the graduate level? Yeah,
one thing I would like to say I'll be brief because of the time. And one thing I like to say is that nobody likes to introduce environmental communication, because our media people, like our journalists, I said, we don't want to get into area we are not sure about, or we don't want to put in very hard work to learn new things. When I first started environmental communication or science communication, when I intervened, even pH, negative logarithm of hydrogen ion, all these sort of things, the acidity, alkalinity, even small things I need to pick it up. So one thing is that I will say a simple thing. You analyze in any of the media departments, all your students do documentary. I will say that at least 30% of the documentaries are environment documentaries. So check it out and let me know. My young friend, I will ask her to check it out. When 30% of your documentaries are environment documentaries, don't you think you'll have to be a little more sensitive and learn something about environment and do the documentary in a more knowledgeable and creative ways with your background knowledge of interdisciplinary knowledge of environment science? I stop here. Okay, next question.
Thank you,
Sir,
sir.
I want to just add in just
Sure,
a minute
sure.
something. I just wanted to say, sir, because in journalism, more importance is given to conflict communication or disaster communication. So even when we are teaching like journalism students, what we teach is in environment. We teach about cyclones and how to cover that.
Yeah.
So how relevant is environment communication is much more than that, rather than just disasters. So should we start from the bachelors, like earlier the better, or should we wait till they are a little more mature and put this in a very important and crucial course in the masters? That is my question.
Yeah. In bachelor studies, we have a paper that environment education that some of the universities are skipping. That's as part of the Supreme Court mandate. And that we should not leave it even if we are doing a bachelor's course in journalism or communication, any of the things. And you are saying that the cyclone and how a depression is caused, even these sort of aspects, people need to be sensitized and what impact it has. And cyclone, because of depression, along with the wind, it crosses the shore and it rises the wave to a height which normally it won't come. Then it has a big landfall. That this basic science of cyclone also we need to teach the students. Otherwise, they may not. Another aspect is that you said the conflict journalism, and internationally also that one of my other specialization is the peace building, peace journalism. The conflict journalism with peace journalism, we need to take the science of peace journalism. How people resolve the peace, and journalists have to be taught sensitivity also. I will say an example of a major television organization. If I say the name of the organization, I will be defaming the organization. You will have a good name about it. The organization went with the cameras and everything to the tsunami hit village in the 2004. And a woman has lost her husband, and she had 4 babies, 2 other babies she has lost. She was asked to carry the 2 babies, infant babies, and do a picture to camera. She was doing some interview, and she was very powerfully articulating emotionally. And they were dramatizing it so much that the moment the camera was switched off, she dropped both the babies on the ground. Both the babies shrieking and crying. This is the way media people have to do it. And our famous reporter covered the gargle, and the picture to camera on the other side of the gargle, she asked the camera crew to switch on the lights. And the Pakistanis identified that there is some movement, and they fired it. The TV crew did not die, but some of the soldiers were killed. That should not be there. We should be very sensitive towards the people and the situation.
Next, we'll take 2 questions at a time. So I'll try to combine the 2 questions. One is from Dr. Saurav Gupta, and the other is from Aniruddha Jaina. So the question, so I'm basically combining these 2 questions. So, so Aniruddha Jaina asks, how research in the area of environmental communication can help communities counter the agendas of extractive industries and extractive capitalists? And in similar lines, how can one...
Can you repeat it, sir? The question.
Sure. How research in the area of environmental communication can help communities counter the agendas of extractive industries and capitalists. So I'll just add another point to that question. This is by Dr. Saurav Gupta, is how one may academically collaborate with let's say, environmental departments. For example, the biodiversity at the Central University of Odisha.
Yeah, one thing is that, of course, I come from a state which is very highly critical of national education policy, and even our chief minister wanted to be withdrawn. But one aspect it talks about is that I'm critical, but not fully critical. One aspect thing is that it talks about the interdisciplinary approach, and truly the people can choose the courses also. And most of my PhD students I supervise in the area of environmental communication. All the 4 courses I ask them to take is sustainable development, water and climate change, completely in the area of the environmental aspect. Because I don't normally, some other supervisor will put the same student in the same department, but I don't want to put, because I already studied a master's in communication. They know what is communication. Let them learn new things, and let them struggle. And of course, that is a slightly difficult thing, but all of them come across well. They don't fail in that, and we are expected to get at least minimum of B or A plus, and they get it also. And coming to this point that we have another stream of media specialization, communication for development. Even taking off from that also, that many of our media department, apart from giving people the media skills, we are sensitizing our people to social aspects. I would say that even as a journalist, I would say that as a print media journalist, you cannot be a successful journalist only if you have a flair for writing, a print media journalist. You need to have awareness of the society. You need to have, if somebody, for instance, earlier as a CUP journalist, when I went for a meeting, there was a police commissioner meet. Schools were asked to come. And at that point of time, one small chubby boy took the mic and said, some people are protesting in the streets. They were on a rally. I couldn't reach my home. They were protesting for some particular caste which was suppressed or some social issue. You need not support that. At least you should know what the issue is about. Some of us do not bother about the issues. And just a platform communication would not take you to higher level in this journalism or any of the media world. And when you have a social thought, and one aspect of the social thought, and even I see environmental communication as one aspect of communication for development. When that is the case, when you talk about anti-nuclear thing, or when you talk about mining issues and communication, you will be able to side with the people and take their sides and understand the real perspectives and why they take the people. Because, for instance, when people take a side themselves, most probably they would not be wrong, because they are in the lived reality. They know what is right for them, what is wrong for them. So in a very rare case, they'll be wrong. So you'll have to study them and take the sides. And even if tanneries are there in Tirupur or some other thing, if they are spoiling the field and the crop yield is becoming toxic, you need to put them the effluent treatment plan. And if the protest is there, and if you also take up research in that, how the media communicates that will also get into policy implication. One of my PhD thesis was I guided was in Chennai floods. Some of the aspects we have said is that it got into the policy implementation. So that sort of thing, we will be able to do it. And when you do it in environment communication, the social impact will create will be really tremendous. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. That was quite an engaging
Thank
talk.
you, Souptik. Yeah. Thank you, Souptik. It was well moderated. Thank you, Professor Arul Aram. It was a great talk. And I appreciate the talk because, in fact, I teach the development communication here at undergraduate level. And it's a great course, and it must be helpful to the students to be oriented in a proper direction. And it is very essential course. Thank you, Professor Arul Aram, for joining with us and delivering the talk. Thank you a lot.